Hello everybody. I would like to commence today by acknowledging that Asialink at the University of Melbourne is on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people who have lived here and been the custodians of this land for thousands of years. I would also like to pay my respects to all traditional custodians and First Nations people on whose land we may all be joining today. In particular, I would like to pay my respects to the Muanina and Palawa people on whose land I have the privilege to be on today, in Nipalina, Lutruwita, Hobart, Tasmania. I pay my respect to land, water, elders past, present, and the strength of the emerging leaders in this beautiful and ancient place. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hello, my name is Pippa Dickson and I'm the Director of Asialink Arts at the University of Melbourne. As the Director of Asialink Arts, I am committed to facilitating true partnerships and cooperation between Australia and Asia in the arts and creative industry sectors. Asialink Arts has had relationships with collaborators in China for over 30 years, and we are committed to furthering partnerships and cross-cultural understanding. Today, I am thrilled to present two exceptional Australian companies at the forefront of creating immersive visitor experiences and creative environments. Tony Holzner, co-founder and creative director of Art Processes, and James Boyce, founder and creative visionary behind Grumpy Sailor. In the following conversations, I explore their inspirations, approaches, techniques, and what they believe is the next frontier for their work, locally and globally. Morning, James. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you again, Pippa.
Always good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. James, I wanted to ask you a few questions and start off by asking you, what do you really love about the work that you do?
That's a big question to start with. Depends on which day. I am James Boyce. I'm the CEO here at Grumpy Sailor. What do I love about what we do? We're a bit of an interesting mix, a bit of a rare breed of an organisation. We're really privileged to be able to work across a dynamic group of different industries, but primarily from technology, large technology clients through to arts and culture and the built environment. And so we're really, I guess we're building things that have a lot of artistic integrity. So I love coming to work every day because I get to work on all of the things that I like. So yeah.
And you're based in Sydney. What does your team look like?
We've got a multidisciplinary team, so we're based out of Sydney, but we move around a lot. So our headquarters here in New South Wales is structured through three sort of major disciplines: project management, design and creative, and then development.
We're going to have a look at some of your work in a moment, but you create really beautiful immersive environments that for me look incredibly technically detailed and complex. How much of a part does technology and the innovation play, or is it more the creative end and the ideas? So how can you explain a little bit about the balance and where is the emphasis for you?
It really starts at the purpose of what it is that you're trying to achieve. And so I think ultimately the reason our work is able to take on so many different forms and shapes is that ultimately we're not leading from a pre-constructed playbook. We're really looking at sort of talking to the institutions, the cultural practitioners, the curators, the institutions in any shape or form, businesses, really trying to find organisationally what they're trying to achieve with the thing that they're doing. And then we work backwards from there. And so every time we add it, it's like an onion that we're sort of, I guess, reverse peeling. We just keep adding layers and layers and layers on until what you get, for the end user, you see something that's really stunning and complex and really unusual. but it's really come out of a need, or a problem that somebody's trying to solve, or a story that somebody's trying to tell. So that's kind of that's where we start, and it's sort of, yeah, it can you have to rein it in sometimes because
I bet.
different places that you can go with that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, it would be enormously tangential, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So you've made some really beautiful projects, and it sounds like that it's quite a collaborative process with potential clients or with clients. And there's a lot of communication involved, I think is what I'm hearing there. You've done a really beautiful project called River Connections, and it's about empowering First Peoples perspectives. What does that mean?
I guess it really comes right back to what I was saying previously about purpose. That project was, I guess, initially started from a utility perspective. The Melbourne Museum, they had a space that they wanted to turn into an interactive learning space. They also have a organisational imperative to look at all of the work that they do through a variety of lenses, and one of the most important lenses in Australia at the moment is sort of that lens of the Indigenous perspective, and it's a natural history museum, so it was really about trying to find the space where those intersect. It was probably a longer project than we would normally undergo, because there was so much what we call here in Australia deep listening, which is a process that is kind of taught to us non-Indigenous parts of the community around how you can actually sort of stop, sit back, listen and observe before you even get into a co-design process. So all of our projects are collaborative, but ultimately this project really taught us a lot around, I guess, how to approach that process of co-design, because they're not our stories to tell.
James, it's such a beautiful project.
There's lots of moving parts, lots of different tensions in every project, but the tension in this particular one was really how to get out of the way and allow somebody else to tell their story, but do it in a really unique way that would really draw people in. And I think that project has surpassed all of our expectations. And it's one of those things is when you're sort of in a small room and of people, and you're working on something as dynamic as that, it's not until you put your head above the parapet and kind of see what's actually kind of resonating with people. And emotional resonance is kind of why we do what we do.
What was the audience response? And do you get an opportunity to witness the audiences absorbing and being immersed in this work?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been challenges with this one because it got launched just before COVID, but we had a couple of months of it running. I don't know if we've had any data on it yet. I guess it's picked up a swag of really high-end awards.
Congratulations.
More than we had anticipated it would. I guess that's not why we do it. And it's kind of, that's never the focus. The focus is to create something that has impact and emotional resonance to the community. But it reminds me of another project, because you see people's faces we did a project years ago, or not that many years ago. It's actually only about 18 months ago with Acme, called the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, and the way audiences responded to that is similar to the way that people respond to river connections. It's the mouth is agape. It's kind of they're completely entranced in the moment, and we know we've done our job properly. And I don't have any metrics. We don't have any metrics yet, but we'll end up getting some from the Melbourne Museum around how it's being used. But all of the anecdotal response has just been it's not something we've seen before. Which is
I love that qualitative data though, which is real life, you know, seeing people's expressions, knowing that you have transformed something for them and given them something unexpected and a new experience.
There's this quote from the original Lewis Carroll book, and he refers to this world like no place on earth, full of mystery and wonder and danger. Our tea party needed to be an embodiment of that. Our team worked closely with Anna Triglowan to design the placement, the density, the size of the cups and the saucers, which we would eventually send off to be 3D printed and physically secured to the tables. Projecting onto a whole lot of uniquely sized and shaped objects on the table also required a lot of testing. Paul Roger and Aaron Marshall worked tirelessly, lining up the projections and doing all of the mapping. And this all then had to be reflected in the visuals, so there was this dance back and forth between physical and virtual tweaks.
You've done a whole range of amazing and quite diverse projects. Another one that I'm fascinated with is the Hyde Park Barracks, which I know is another relatively new project. You've been very busy, it seems. This is an interesting project because it's as much about context. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the place and site specificity?
When you look at Hyde Park Barracks was, I guess, one of the original, buildings in colonial Australia, and it was where it's been used for, multiple different use cases. So it was a women's prison for a while. It was a barracks for the soldiers. So the stories are sort of, they're bleeding from the walls when you walk in there, and so the context of that particular place and space really helps to define the purpose of what it is that you're trying to communicate. And so
it's incredibly emotive though, this, isn't it? Like it speaks to you right from the moment that you're approaching the building right through. Can we just, before we go much further, can we just take a quick look so the audience can see what we're talking about? Thanks, James.
My great-great-grandfather.
My great-great-grandmother.
I'm the great-great-great-great-grandson.
For a long time, my family talked about this convict in the family.
He stole a coral necklace when he was 11 years old. She arrived here for a better life.
One of the young boys that fled from the massacre that escaped.
I was looking at bricks that she looked at. I was walking on floorboards that she walked on. It was a bit emotional.
It was something that I grew up with. It was something that was just always in the back of my mind.
We then blended into that world of both Aboriginal and also of colonial.
I let the stories sit together and I run them parallel, but it's a part of my DNA.
It's part of me. It's part of who I am.
We carry the scars of what had happened to our people. I'm alive to actually pass on the legacy of his that he left behind.
Yeah, so this piece of work is really was really content-led. We're looking at the Indigenous perspectives of the land before the Hyde Park Barracks came to be, and then we were looking at stories that came from the First Fleet or just immediately post-colonial use cases of that space. And so I guess the key pillar of this particular project was how this space, the Hyde Park Barracks, had changed over the years, and the different stories that were accessible through, and the different lives that have been shaped and changed by this quite incredible and quite dark building, and I say dark in terms of its history. It has it's not a particularly optimistic
it's
and
weighty.
and jovial
it's sort of
story.
weighty, right?
It's very weighty, yeah.
Right?
But people don't go there to you want to give them a taste and a feel of that, I guess, that cultural relevance, but you don't want them walking away sort of feeling so morbid, because there's a real dark history to Australia, and confronting it head on and actually telling those stories is really vital from a cultural perspective as we grow as a nation, is sort of accepting our past and then looking to shape a new future. So that's what Hyde Park's Barracks is as a project, and we were incredibly privileged to be working on that.
On this idea of the research that goes into projects, some of your work is actually, let's face it, life-saving. It's not just beautiful and immersive storytelling, it's actually communicating very important information to people. And let's take a look at this project first before we have a chat about it, Road to Zero. So we can see what's going on a little bit, but can you talk a little bit about what this client wanted to achieve with this? What was the purpose, as you put it, of this project?
I remember when we used to work in, when I used to work in advertising, one of the things that always got us out of trouble was when something went wrong on a project, you go, you know what? We're not saving lives. So the risk is not that high. I think as Grumps has grown and progressed from being, I guess, a bit of an R&D team, a lab that built things, to an organisation that is responsible for projects that have to last 10 years or more, the responsibility goes up. This project for the Transport Accident Commission, the Road to Zero, was a really unique project in terms of its value and impact to the community. We worked with the Behavioural Psychology Unit at the Transport Accident Commission, and they'd sort of come to the conclusion that a lot of the work that they were putting out into the world was not making as much change as they wanted it to. And so one of the things that they were really focused on was, well, could we build an environment or a space that taught children before they became license-holding juveniles or teenagers about the impact of them as a road user or a pedestrian or a cyclist, so that they were aware of, I guess, the physics really and the science behind why it's really important to be safe in and around roads, with the hope that you're actually sort of starting to shape minds and shape people's understanding of how those systems work. And so, yeah, the project is packed full of technology, way more technology than I would ever put in a place. But it's really quite interesting technology because for a 15-year-old, all they want to do is put a VR headset on. So it's really built with that audience in mind. And so it goes back to that kind of purpose and really trying to understand exactly what it is that they're trying to achieve and then build that vision with them. It's not something that we go away and work in a corner and then come back and say, ta-da. It's something that we're constantly checking in at and really delivering something that has utility as much as it has emotional resonance.
Well, I think that really leads me to our sort of final question and I know that you're working on some really exciting, quite divergent projects at the moment that are just a little bit too early to talk about, which is really exciting. But, what are the new horizons, not just for you personally and for Grumpy Sailor and your team, but what do you think is a really exciting frontier for technology in the work in your sector at the moment?
One of the approaches that we have, which I think has put us in good stead, is the fact that we see technology as an enabler, it's not the end result. It's actually a facilitator for you to get there. So when we're designing experiences, we're not really looking at technology first. And I think that as people come out of COVID and as the sort of the shape of the new world starts to take place, I think that there's going to be even greater demand for us to create, I guess, unifying and community spaces that really have a purpose behind them. I think that I saw a statistic the other day that said that 3 out of 4 millennials would prefer to spend money on an experience than a product. I think that as the new world takes shape, I think it's really the responsibility of those that can to create, and using things like 5G and the Internet of Things to create dynamic spaces that don't have technology right at the front, but have a reason for being, right, or a reason for somebody to come in there. And they're simply sort of enabling a new way for us to communicate with them. I think one of the big challenges is when people are walking around with a phone and they're interacting with their environment through this small piece of glass in their hand. We've had a few projects that have tried to do that. I think it's fundamentally something that will shift as technology becomes more ubiquitous and we're able to, I guess, put it to the periphery. Like when you go to the theatre, you don't really want to see the flies or the backstage. What you go to see is the story and to engage with it. So anything that interferes with that, I think technology will take a backward step, or at least I hope it will, and it certainly will in our work, and so that people can better engage with the environments and the stories and the designs that we're really trying to create for them.
Just one quick last thing.
That's not that succinct.
I think I've got so many thoughts racing through my mind in response to that. But just quickly, what about cross-cultural work and working with people from different cultural backgrounds and linguistic backgrounds? How much can technology play a role in creating bridges?
Yeah, well, look, there's certainly a lot of technologies out there that make it much easier to work with people anywhere in the world right now. I think as an organisation, and speaking from experience, I think because we work all over the world with a variety of different partners, what really excites me about that is that the stories that we tell as a human race vary so much from region to region, and I think that there's ways, or that really interests me. It really interests me in terms of different collaborations that can be had, different collaborations that can be created. And it doesn't have to be just us, right? It could be a number of different stakeholders coming together to create something that has a value to communities, both in the place in which you create the thing, but also outside of that for people to interpret what's going on. So I think that, that's really, I don't think it's ever been easier. I think the fact that you can actually just get on the phone these days to anywhere on the planet, I think is creating some really interesting dynamics at the same time as you're not allowed to travel anywhere else on the planet, right? So I think that there's this really, I guess, strange tautology that's existing at the moment in terms of how people are working, but you can go further now than I think you've ever been able to, even without planes flying from country to country. So the new world awaits. I think it's exciting.
Amazing. James, I can't thank you enough, and I'm sure the audience here today are also really thrilled to meet you and hear your story. Thanks for spending the time with us, and you're such an inspiration. Grumpy Sailor, really doing fantastic work, and hugely award-winning at the moment, which must be hugely gratifying for the work that you're doing. So congratulations, and thanks again for joining us today.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me, and have a great rest of conference, everyone.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with James Boyce from Grumpy Sailor. Next up is a conversation with Tony Holzner from Art Processes based in Melbourne. We're so lucky to have these two luminaries talking about their work I hope you enjoy this next conversation. Morning. How are you, Tony?
Hi, Pippa. Good. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And thanks so much for joining us today. Tony, I'm really keen to learn from you a little bit about how art processes got started and some of your foundational work and what you might have learned from that.
Yeah, well, I guess the focus of all our work is to try and create harmony between people, place, art, content, and technology. We're always balancing each of these parts to better complement one another and to make public spaces basically more intuitive and more enjoyable and more interesting. We formed art processes following the research and development we did with Mona's founder, David Walsh, in the lead up to Mona's opening in 2011. And this research really focused on new approaches to museum interpretation. Specifically, Mona wanted to find a way to replace traditional museum artwork wall labels with a device that would provide a much richer and more personalized experience. So we developed a touchscreen device called the O that delivers rich content based on your precise location in the museum and also what you're looking at in terms of the artworks on display. And so what this means is that it allows each visitor to Mona to access very relevant content about those works that they're most interested in just with a single tap.
Tony, I know that the Museum of Old and New Art, Mona, was a foundational project for art processes. Let's take a look at a clip of that now.
Art isn't what's created, it's the experience of interacting with it. There's no art without a viewer. When art processes produced the O, it didn't so much benefit Mona as create it. I could easily have not opened the doors if some of the art didn't look right or some of the lighting wasn't working. But if the O wasn't there, I was never going to open because it was the thing that gave me the freedom to create in the way that I wanted to create. I anticipate a future in which no one has to queue for anything. And that starts with knowing where people are with their permission, because they will give you permission in return for you giving them convenience. I wanted to create an atmosphere where people felt engaged and valued, where their opinions were as valued as my opinions. And as I played with it, I became aware that it was a lot more than I'd intended it to be. It became a tool for creativity. And now curators, artists, myself and others are using it as part of the artistic creation process.
I guess the other important thing about our work with Mona is that it really puts the visitor at the centre of the experience. There are no wall labels telling them where to look or telling them what artwork is more important, and that's critical. It really means that the experience is entirely based on their own interest and their own curiosity. And it also has some really important run-on effects to Mona's exhibition designers, which get a lot more freedom in terms of how they display the artworks, because there's no need for that traditional printed signage or wall label approach. It means things like the lighting, for example, can be much more dramatic and further increase that level of immersion. I guess there's one other thing is about Mona is it has a very important part is that the O actually asks each visitor whether they love or hate each work on display. And again, this helps to place the visitor at the very center of the experience by saying to them that we value your opinion and your thoughts are important to us.
That's incredible. And it does seem to me that that does give the visitor and the audience a huge degree of autonomy in this experience and adds this extra dimension, this love or hate as an engagement tool. It's really quite revolutionary. Had you seen anything like this anywhere else in the world before?
No, not really is the honest answer. We do like to think we pioneered certain elements of this, and Mona really brings all of those different elements together very well. It goes back to that point about it being very seamless. And that speaks to David Walsh's vision in particular, and the amazing people that form the team that created Mona. It just works together. All those elements are always in harmony, and the visitor leaves Mona having had a really wonderful experience.
Tony, you've done some really exceptional work recently, and one of the projects that I think is quite transformational in the way that we are starting to understand and appreciate First Nations cultures and cultural artefacts. We've got a really great clip of this project. Let's take a look. It's at the University of Melbourne, the Awaken exhibition. Talk a little bit about your approach and what that is doing, that exhibition?
Yeah, sure. So we worked on a really interesting project with the University of Melbourne called Awaken. This project features Indigenous cultural artefacts from the Donald Thompson collection. And one of the key learnings early on in the design of the project, in close discussion with the Indigenous stakeholders, was that the collection artifacts and objects were not actually artifacts or objects at all. Instead, they were really belongings. And it's an important distinction. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how technology could better support this idea. And we ended up using a combination of 3D scanning and photogrammetry techniques to digitize a selection of these belongings. We then used AR and VR interfaces to unlock them, those belongings, from the exhibition's glass display cases, and to actually replace those belongings back into the remote regional Australian landscape where they originated from, to take them back home, in other words. We also work with remote Indigenous communities in far northern Australia to produce the 360-degree VR video content as part of this process. And the University of Melbourne is also using this interactive collection content as part of an Indigenous community outreach program in remote parts of Australia where the belongings actually originate from. And the response from the local community has actually been very positive.
That's amazing, Tony. What an exceptional project, and what a privilege, I guess, to have proximity and connection to these, not just the objects, but the stories around them. Did you have any personal insights or learnings from projects like this?
Yeah, I think it really opens our minds into the diversity of perspectives. And I think it's a critical part of all the work we do is listening and learning. And it gives no end of new ideas because you're really seeing it in very different ways. And it's hugely empowering. And we really hope to do, new and interesting and valuable work when we're working with more diverse groups. That's super important to the work we do. I think there was one quite important and palpable moment when we were discussing the results of the project with Indigenous communities, and one comment was made that although the technology and the digital content itself was really amazing and was really empowering to be able to see that up close and outside the display cases, there was still this feeling that the best scenario would be to actually to pick up and hold those belongings in the real. And that's something that we technology isn't at that point yet, and certainly it points to how complex that part is, but certainly we like to think we've helped a little bit in that regard. But again, it comes down to perspectives.
Tony, you've done so much incredible work. There's a exhibition at the Art Gallery New South Wales that seems to really illustrate the immersive capability of your projects.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work with the Art Gallery New South Wales over the years for their temporary exhibitions, and this work in particular really plays with the idea of an eyes up experience, and it's all about layering really rich, ambient, moody and thought-provoking sound. But the best way to get a sense of this is to actually listen to it. So I'll shut up and perhaps we can look at the video for this.
Thank you, Tony. The Art Gallery of New South Wales.
For Art Gallery of New South Wales, we produced the Japan Supernatural audio experience. What we mean by audio experience is something a little more immersive than your typical audio guide. It's a mobile device and it's location aware. It uses Bluetooth to figure out where the visitor is as they move around the space. Broken down, it's composed of different gallery soundscapes. You can just take in the artworks and your soundtrack will update as you move throughout the space.
So Tony, how does your work build bridges and what are its cross-cultural capabilities? I'm wondering if you've thought about how the work could translate across cultural and linguistic differences.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. Yeah, actually, from a language point of view, we're doing a lot of research into how technology interfaces can celebrate the diversity of language. Specifically, we're experimenting with ways to make museum experiences more personal, with more intuitive approaches to content delivery that allow digital overlays to automatically respond to the language and accessibility preferences of each specific visitor. So as an example, this might mean that as soon as you approach any digital display, that display automatically adjusts to show the content in your specific language. And we can do this with our software platform, which does all the heavy lifting to enable real-time delivery of those personalized multilingual content.
So you can work anywhere in the world and people will understand what that content is, where it's from, how it was created. That's incredible for opening up opportunities for dialogue and new understanding.
Yeah,
and inclusion, I think, too, yeah?
Absolutely. It poses the possibility, I guess, that literally just by walking past an interactive display, or if there is a wall that is perhaps a more digital canvas, that the words will subtly change and reflect the language that you need at that point in space and time. So that's where it's at right now, and we are experimenting with a number of our cultural sector partners in that area.
Wow. I could see a huge potential, not just in the cultural sector, but in the urban landscape as well, for wayfinding, interpretation in cities, particularly in regional areas where often when you're traveling, there's such a barrier to understanding. It's very monolinguistic in many places around the world. So that's fantastic, Tony. I know that, you're always exploring the new frontier and you are pioneering so much of this technology globally. What are some of the new frontiers? You mentioned before about sort of trying to create more physical, tangible or haptic experiences through technology. How far away are we from that?
Yeah, it's another good question. I think we're here right now. The current present moment, we can do a lot of incredible things in terms of what we like to call more natural interfaces. So we can use things like motion control and motion sensing within fairly complex 3D environments, and we can bring that into the real world, and we can place you inside that and then overlay it all at once. But what it really means is it starts to blur those lines between the physical and the virtual, the real and the digital, in a way that's really, really builds and heightens these levels of immersion that we're looking for, that make it more interesting, that make it more exciting, that make it more enjoyable or more rewarding, whatever the goal is for that space, be it in the public realm, or be it at a private organisation. There's so much that we can do with that approach.
And through your recent experiences and project delivery, I know that you put the audience, and as you described with Mona, there's a lot of autonomy given over, a lot of freedoms, and you consider the audience part of the creative process. How do you see audiences changing? Is there a lot of shift in the way people are expecting to visit and engage in these places?
Yes, I think the short answer is yes, definitely. The expectations of the audience always change. They're always in flux, and we need to be very mindful of that. Placing the audience at the centre is definitely the answer, but then looking at more tangible ways to do that is crucial. One of the approaches that we're looking at a lot at the moment is the idea that to actually learn through doing, so that you're not even necessarily cognizant or aware that you're in a learning space, but that's happening organically. And so looking at different content approaches to support that, making sure that there are no barriers to entry from an accessibility point of view, making sure that you literally can jump into the experience without even thinking, and that you stay in the present moment, and that really you just have a good time.
That's so great. So finally, I can't help but ask, you're on this fantastic growth period at the moment. You have some exceptional new projects coming online very soon, like the new museum in Western Australia and others, Stockman's Hall of Fame. There's a lot of them we've discussed previously. I was wondering, what are your dream clients? Where would you really like to be working, and where are you moving to globally at the moment?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of exciting things happening at the moment for us. We're growing, and we're growing because we keep finding these brilliantly talented people that do things a lot better than I and the founders can ever do. So that's really empowering. There are at least, probably 10 to 15 very exciting projects in the pipeline. Unfortunately, I can't really talk about them except to say that they're all on a par with Mona. And so that's very exciting, is that as we grow, we see all these opportunities coming that are really in line with how we originally started and the reasons we started, in terms of empowering the audience, putting the visitor at the centre of the experience. So that will remain our focus forever and a day.
That's amazing. Congratulations, Tony. It's such a success story, Art Processes. I know Mona intimately. I live in Tasmania, where it's located, and I can see from firsthand experience the transformational effect the O and this technology has had on that place, and therefore the reverberations throughout the state and nationally. and internationally. So congratulations. Thank you so much for joining us today, and best of luck for the future.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
I hope you found those discussions and introductions to Australian creative talent as inspiring as we did. And we hope this opens up many more conversations and interest in Australia and our vast creative and technological capabilities. Further to this, we look forward to shared advancements and new global collaborations. Thank you so much for watching.